morning, everybody. How are you guys doing this morning? Good. Wow, that's awesome. You guys were way better than first service. Probably because I didn't do that. But I just would like to welcome you all so much. We are so excited that you guys are here with us this morning. Today we're going to continue in our summer series, Gear Up, that we've been doing over these past couple months. And we're blessed enough to be able to have a guest speaker. So I would like you guys' help in welcoming up our district superintendent, Pastor Wes Smith.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be back at Countryside. Been a place that I've been connected to for some time, and Pastor Mark and I have been friends for way longer than both of us can remember these days, and so it's been great to connect occasionally here, and great to be here this Sunday. And I have the privilege, as he mentioned, to lead our network of churches over the, over a 9-state region, and I bring you greetings from many of them. Tell the folks at Countryside hi and those kinds of things. Specifically, last Sunday, I was on the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska at a church in Soldotna. And the pastor there is Brian Wall, who was on staff here for a long time. And when he and Shanda moved to Soldotna, that was just a small, struggling church. And over the course of, I think it's been something like 9 years, God has done tremendous things, and that's in part because of the way you prepared he and Shanda and sent them off and have prayed for them and celebrated them. So they especially wanted me to say, when you're at Countryside, say hi, say thank you, because we've really benefited from that. And so thanks for being all you are, and thanks for your generous spirit and your sending spirit. You're a fantastic church led by just a great team, and really excited to be here and to bring you greetings from our network of families who, by the way, many pray for you. Like pray for the mission you have here in Spearfish in the region, and so thanks for all you're doing. I have been given the privilege today to teach from God's Word, and I'm going to be in 1 Samuel 17 in a real familiar story today. Like if this is your first time ever in church, you've heard of the story I'm going to be talking about, typically referred to David and Goliath, right? And spoiler alert, if you haven't heard, the little guy beats the big guy. That's what we know from the story. It's pretty amazing. We're actually going to dig pretty deep into it, but before we do that, here's the idea. Here's why it matters that we look at this story. The reality of life is that you're going to face some giants in your life. I wish I could say, because here's how it would be if I were in charge. If I were in charge, when the giants come in front of us, God would remove them. And we just keep going, pretty smooth sailing. I can be honest, I think, right? I kind of disagree with God on this one. We talk about this. He doesn't do that most of the time. Sometimes he does, and I love it. I throw a party. Because sometimes something bad, big, and right in front of me, and he just solves it, and it's awesome. But usually what he does is he allows that to take me to my knees, and together we face that thing. And it doesn't just get removed, it stays big and bad. That's usually what happens. And so in the story that we look at today, there's this young person whom God has spent years being ready, building, so that when he faced his giant, he was ready. He knew God would be with him. And that's our story. God's doing that right now. And if you cooperate, if I cooperate with him, when we face the giant that he's unlikely to just remove for us, we'll have the same heart that David had. A heart of faith and courage prepared to take on that challenge. Now, usually our giants don't come in the form of 9+ feet with the armor on and a sword, right? That's probably unlikely in your life. What's more likely is news from the doctor. What's more likely is sitting in front of a marriage counselor taking on a giant. What's more likely is a financial statement, an addiction that you didn't see coming. Those things are more likely, just as real and just as big and bad, right? So, how do we cooperate with a God who's preparing us for that? Well, if you know the story, there's this point in the story where David is with the king trying to explain why it is that this 17-year-old kid, approximately, we don't know exactly, could take on a giant when all the best warriors in the nation of Israel could not take on this giant from the evil empire, right? Like why him? And he has this explanation to the king as to why he, the least in his family, he would be the youngest child. And in David's day, the youngest child was the least relevant, the least important. I'm the oldest in my family. I think this is right. It's biblical, right? So the least is the least, right? So this is David, like he's only been given the chance to be a shepherd. And his brothers are at war, and they're going to rise in stature, and he's always going to probably be a sheep herder, they think at this point. You know, the 13 sheep, and that's going to be his deal, and he's just there to bring lunch to the brothers. And so he's this 17-year-old kid with the king trying to explain why he, the least in his family, should take on the giant, okay? And you'll notice, here's what I want to draw this. He talks about the fact that as a shepherd, he faced everyday challenges with God. Often, I'm sure nobody was watching, but he faced everyday challenges. By the way, that's how God's going to be building your faith, is by facing everyday challenges. Let's read together what David has to say to King Saul about what he had to face. He says, your servant, he's talking about himself, has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant, he's saying, I've killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. So think about this if you're David. Let's just think through this for a minute. I'll tell you what my reaction would be. I'm a kid, I'm watching some sheep, and a lion comes. Here's my response. You win some, you lose some, right? Right? I mean, be real. Like, every organization experiences depreciation. Right? So I'd go back to dinner. I'd say, Dad, lion, big lion, lost a sheep. Sorry. And my guess would be the reaction would be, yeah, what are you going to do? David, though, says, you know what? To everybody else around me, my life right now might be meaningless. Nobody might be writing a story about this, but it's the job God has provided. It's what's in front of me. And I'm going to believe that God's with me. And he goes after a lion. And by the way, this isn't about David being awesome with lions. This is about God showing up and helping David because otherwise the lion kills David, right? And David discovers that. I bet he started with like a coyote or a house cat or something, right? Like there was that, and then he worked his way up, and now he knows lion and bear. And then, so he's talking to King Saul, and he's like, I know God will be with me. How do I know? Because I went after a lion, and he was right there. We've got this. I know. So I guess here's what my point. Like, if you wait until you face a big giant in your life to start developing confidence that God is with you, it'll be too late. You can hear 100 sermons and teachings and go to church and sing a lot of great songs and all that, and you'll have some great head knowledge, but if you for yourself haven't experienced that when you step out in faith, God's with you, you won't know it. And I remember, anybody here climbed Devil's Tower? There's one. maybe two people climbed Devil's Tower. Some years ago, I'd always wanted to climb it. The problem is I'm not a rock climber, I'm not built like a rock climber, and I'm afraid of heights. But I always thought like it would be really cool to climb it. So I'd always think that'd be neat. Well, I had a friend in those days who climbed it regularly, and I would occasionally mention that, and finally one day he talked me into climbing Devil's Tower with him. And if you've ever done that, you go to the base of it, at least in those days, many years ago, you had to take a class before you were allowed to climb it. And in the class, they had the rope and the other equipment, the carabiners, all the other equipment, the harness and stuff, and they would tell you how strong it is. Like I remember the carabiner, they said, this will hold 300, I think it was 85 pounds. And I was 200 and none of your business, but I was under that weight limit, right? And I believed them, like it looked really strong. So we start climbing, and we get about a third, maybe halfway, some distance up, and we reach this leg of the climb that's like sheer. Like it looked like to me there's nothing. But I'm with a guy, and he's a typical rock climber. He's like 160 pounds, and all of it is in forearm muscle, like every bit of it, right? And I am not any of that. And so I get about halfway up that leg, and everything comes loose. And I fall. I don't know how far it was. It felt like forever. And I screamed like a grade schooler. I mean, I was terrified. He claims I asked for my mommy, okay? I think he's a liar, but I don't know what I said exactly, okay? It was unbelievable, unbelievable. I fell, my memory is that I fell 4 times at that one spot. Fall, climb back up, climb to that spot, boom, just again. But you know something? This is the reason I tell us. There was a lot of difference between the first time I fell and the 4th time I fell. Matter of fact, the 4th time I fell, I still remember well too, because it was a blast. It was fun. I enjoyed the view. I enjoyed the adrenaline rush. There was still plenty of that, but I enjoyed that. What changed between the 1st and the 4th, you see? You see, nothing informationally had changed, right? I still had all the same information I'd gotten at the class and that he'd told me and all that. But what had changed is that I, for myself, had experienced that when you fall, the rope holds. It's going to every time. So let's do it again, right? Okay. So here's what I want to ask you. What is it you're facing right now in your life? And maybe it doesn't seem to be of great spiritual consequence. But it's hard. What is it you're facing right now? It's coming Monday. The appointment's Thursday, whatever. Look at that as a way you can cooperate, as a way you can learn to face challenges with God. Talk through that with Him. Ask for some specific things. Ask for wisdom, strength, peace. Talk through that process with Him. Take that on. Maybe you've been shrinking back. Maybe you've been saying, I'm not up to that line. I can't, and you're right. You're not. But maybe this is a different week, because today you take that on. And when you take that on and you discover, you know what? There was hard parts. There was success and failure. But through that, God was actually with me. Like I really believe, I really understood that. Okay, He's with me. That's the first way. The second way is by facing criticism. This, again, I don't know if I mentioned this before. I don't like this process necessarily. This wasn't my idea. This is God's deal. But He does this. So when I face these challenges, and you the same, you're going to face criticism. David comes to bring lunch to his brothers. He sees Goliath, and he says, is nobody taking this giant on? Everybody says no. He says, well, then I will. And all these people who have been shrinking back from Goliath are jealous about that, right? And that's what you'll discover when you face a marriage challenge or something. People who have been will say, you can't. Are you kidding? You're going to try. No. Or they'll say, Here's how I would do it, right? Well, David's older brother Eliab was part of the army. He'd probably been getting up every morning at breakfast singing Kumbaya with the guys, right? Bacon and eggs, though actually it wouldn't be bacon. It'd be eggs and something else, but whatever, right? And he'd go out, he'd see Goliath, and be like, whoa, big guy. And they'd all go back to their tent, which was okay because everybody was shrinking back. Now his little runt brother, right, comes, and he's going to take on Goliath. Here's what Eliab has to say, and this is the kind of criticism you might. It says, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him. Why have you come down here? With whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are, how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Is a person coming to mind in your life right now? You're facing criticism, right? It says this. What have I done, says David. Can I even speak? He then turned away. You have choices with criticism. Criticism can be valuable because you can learn from it. So you don't want to not hear it. But once heard, you can on the one side, you can be distracted by it. You have an enemy, Satan, and he wants to distract you. He wants to make you get so caught up in conflict with the person criticizing you that you forget to face the actual giant. This is not the story of David and Eliab, is it? This is a story of David and Goliath. It could have been. David could have stopped and says, what are you saying? You're a big wimp. You're the oldest brother. You should be out there. You've always been all fake. Our whole life. I remember back when I was 5 and you were 12. Right, blah, blah, blah. Right. And he comes back, blah, blah. You're in families, right? You're in real families. You know how this goes, right? He could have done that. This would have been the story of David. It probably wouldn't have made the scriptures, but it would have been the story of David and Eliab, right? Or he could have said, and we do this sometimes too, you're right. I'm a shepherd. I'm a 17-year-old kid who watches sheep. You're a great warrior. What was I thinking? Right? We do that sometimes too. But he does neither. It says he turns away. He heads towards Goliath. Your journey, for which you are equipped, as we'll see in a moment, is about facing with God your giant. Don't become distracted or demoralized by the criticism you'll receive, often from people who are close to you, who are shrinking back from the challenges in their life. Don't do that. And then finally, I mentioned it already, God's preparing David very uniquely. This is very cool. God is preparing all of this. Like he knows the giant that's coming in 3 years in your life. He knows that. So he's preparing you, and he's been doing this in David's life. Been preparing him real uniquely. So maybe you know enough of the story to remember that finally the King Saul, decides, I'm going to send David out after Goliath. I'm going to let you go, buddy. So what he does is he gives David all of his equipment. He gives him his armor. He gives him his sword. He gives him his shield, all this stuff. And David, again, probably a 16, 17-year-old kid, he can barely stand up with this stuff on. Probably was the first time he'd ever held a sword. And he can barely stand up. He staggers around the room. And then finally he stops and says this to Saul. He says, I can't go in these. I'm not used to them. He took them off, and then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Okay. Just a little timeout, little history note. Many of you would know this. But it turns out in David's day, in his era, they actually came to conclude that the best way to take out a heavily armored giant mighty warrior type was through a group of people who would be known as slingers. They came to be known as slingers. They were highly trained with a shepherd's slingshot. Because with a shepherd's sling in David's day, you could accurately hurl a rock at 800 feet per second, quite accurately, which is about the equivalent of the ballistics of today's .45 automatic pistol. So, God has known Goliath's coming, right? How would it be best for David to take on a 9-foot plus, mighty, strong, highly skilled warrior? Would it be best for him, a 16, 17-year-old kid, to go to hand-to-hand combat with a sword against this guy, never being trained on a sword or anything? Would that be the way to do it? Or would it be better to stand about 20 yards from him and hurl a rock at his head at 800 feet per second? I'll take the rock option, right? Among other things, God is really, really smart, right? Would we agree on that? Maybe? Really, really smart. Brilliant, actually. Not only does he know your giant that's coming, but he also knows exactly how to prepare you with your unique personality, gifts, background, everything to face that giant. And likely, you'll face that giant differently than your coworker, than the other 8th grader at school with you, than your mom or your dad or whoever else wants to give input. Listen to it, hear it. It can be a lot of wisdom in that. But then trust and cooperate that God is preparing you uniquely, to face that giant. Sometimes when we face those things that are hard, we shrink back because we feel underprepared, under-equipped, maybe undereducated, maybe we don't have, well, that's not a strength for us. That's not my personality. That's not. And what that is you saying, God's not with you enough. God's not enough. You don't mean to say that, right? You're saying you're not enough, or you're not the right person. You're exactly the person God wants to use. He didn't want to use Eliab. He chose David. He's choosing you. And when I face my giants, I don't always like that. Like, choose somebody else. This is the conversation I have with God. Like, you chose me for this? Like, you know me. But he did. And there's people watching you, right? There's people watching. The story goes, you know the story, like he takes his slingshot. It wasn't like you get at Walmart. It's one of those spin versions, right? And he puts one stone. I love that David picked 5 stones. That means he didn't have perfect faith yet, right? I think it might take 5 to take this one down, right? I might miss the first 3 times and be running or something. I need 5, right? I don't know what. But it just took one. And he spins that sling, hurls that rock, knocks Goliath down. He goes, he kills Goliath. And then all the Israelite warriors who'd been shrinking back in fear, like they're like, whoa, God, did you see what just happened? God is with us. Like a shepherd just took that guy out. Like, God must be with us. And they go and they surge and the evil empire gets chased away. People are watching you, right? It matters if you don't shrink back. Like your story will give other people courage. You think about your life. How many times in your life have you been afraid or anxious, but you've met someone or you knew someone and you see, you know what? They had a similar addiction and they faced it. And it was hard, and you could critique your journey if you want. But they faced it, and God was with them, and they're victorious. I'm going to try. There's so much at stake. This is who we are as Christ followers. Like we bring light to the world. We overcome, not through our strength. I remember just as a little kid, I think I was in 4th grade. I lived in southern West Virginia in grade school, and I went to a real tough school. Like a lot of bad stuff happened at my school, and a little bit famous. And I remember my dad would sit down and say, "Okay, part of your job as somebody who follows God is to stand up for the least of these, and to say no to some of this stuff, and to stand up for the least of these." And I'm a 4th grader, right? So I'd go to school, and I'd see what he was talking about. I didn't stand up at all. Like, if Dad was here, he'd probably stand up to that, but not me. Like, nope. But I remember a shift in my life, and I think this is how a lot of times it happens in our life. I remember a shift. My family and I were driving down a country road one afternoon, and we came across the road, on the other side of the road, there was a man a large guy, I remember him to this day, had long hair and a big beard and just a big dude, and he had a woman by the neck, and he was just shaking her violently. And my dad slams on the brakes and yells at the guy, "Hey, stop! What do you do? Stop!" And he's startled by that because people had just been driving by and nothing had been happening. And he's startled, and he lets her go, and he turns to my father, and she kind of staggers away a little bit, and he says, "Do you have a place you can get to that's safe?" And she starts to walk away. But there's this moment where, like, is he going to go get her, or is he going to let her go? And here's what he does. He walks around. I remember this. He had a blue Chevy Nova, if you remember what those were. I'm dating myself quite a bit on this story, but 4th grade, right? Like 100 years ago. So anyway, he walks around. He opens up his trunk. And you may remember we used to carry these 4-pronged tire irons around. Well, he gets one of those out. And then, using words that were brand new to me as a 4th grader, interesting, creative words, he begins to explain what he's going to do to my dad with this tire iron. Again, fascinating stuff. And we're just like, whoa, us kids. This is where my mom, who was sitting in the passenger seat up front, begins to give some advice on what should happen next, right? Strong advice, very direct. You can't miss the advice. And she begins to do that. He begins, the guy with the tire iron, begins now to walk towards my dad, the shoulder, and then eventually onto the road, walking towards my dad. Dad gets out of the van, shuts the door, and says to my mom, lock the doors. The keys are there, so if anything goes wrong, you can drive away. My mom disagrees strongly with this plan. Very, very strongly. Emotionally strongly. I mean, it's intense what she has to say about the wisdom of such choices and him generally. I mean, I'll be honest. And so this is going on. At the same time, the guy is yelling, again, all kinds of amazing things that he's thought of that he's going to do with the tire iron. So this is all going on. The three of us, I have two brothers, the three of us are just like, we're like below the window, above the window. We're just like, wow, this is fascinating, right? It's getting a little scary, but boy, we've never seen this before. The guy walks about, I don't know, say 3 feet from my dad, who's just standing there, and then he turns around, goes back to his car, puts the tire iron in the front seat, and drives off. And again, it's just, we're just in the back seat, so whoa. And then there's a negotiation between my mom and dad about whether my dad can get back in the van. That takes, my memory is that took a while. There was a lot of concessions made about choices we'd make in the future, and there's all kind of thing there. Probably came out in marriage counseling years later or something. But eventually my dad gets in, we go to a local police station, report the situation, and I tell that because that's 4th grade, that's a long time ago. But even to this day, I can remember something that did in me. And I'm not recommending that as a course of action for parents, okay? That's not like the deal. But something changed in me, like, oh, when he says God's with us for the least of these, like God is with him. God does care about people. He's with us. I want to see if he's with me. I'm going to step out next time. I could do that if God would be with me. Here's what I want you to remember today. God cares about you as much as he cared about David. Every bit as much. Every bit as much. You have a giant coming. I promise you that. I don't say that happily. I just know how life works. You have a giant coming. Third, God knows that giant's coming, and he's preparing you right now for it. I've staked my life on those three things. Scripture's clear about that. So I want to just talk to God about that in front of you. You're certainly welcome to listen if you'd like. But what I'd really love is if you just have a conversation about it in your life. Father, I love you. I love you for lots of reasons. But I don't always agree. Sometimes you choose not to remove giants. And I want you to. Like you know, we talked about this just last night. We talked about something last night that I think I'd about give anything if you just remove it, like if you just solve that. Sometimes you do. Like sometimes, God, you know this. I ask, and you do. It just goes away. But that's an exception. Because most of the time, Father, we face it together and it doesn't go away. We just have to climb that mountain, face that giant one step at a time. And I hate that. There's a part of that, though, that I love. Part of that I love, and that is in those moments when they're really hard, you give me this sense, sometimes externally, sometimes internally, you give me this sense that you are with me and that you're adequate for the situation. And I love those moments. I love those moments. God, I've got to trust that you know what's coming in my life. You know what's coming in all of our lives. I really believe that. And since you love me so much, you'll prepare me for that. You'll be preparing us. We'll probably fight the battle differently than other people would have fought the battle. We'll face that challenge maybe differently than our neighbor or a coworker or family member or whatever. But you're preparing us. And you'll be there. And you'll be enough. And whether it takes one rock or 5 rocks, whether it takes one attempt or 5 tries, you'll be with us. And you'll give us victory. In some kind of form, you'll give us strength to face what comes in such a way that those who follow us will gain courage and they'll grow closer to you. And whether we sink or swim, live or die, may it be said of us that we would face our giants because we believe there was a God who was with us through life and through death, who held us close. And for us, he was enough. Because for us, you are enough. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen.
Would you join me in thanking Pastor Wes for the words this morning? I don't know about you, but I appreciate when someone has a willingness to say the words that you know what, there's going to be storms in life. There's going to be giants in life, but we serve a God who is going to be with us in those storms and with us as we face those giants and is preparing us for those moments. So thank you, Wes, for those words. If you are here this morning and maybe you don't know what it is to have a relationship with that God who is with us, we would love to have a conversation with you about that. You can either go to the Welcome Center, you can come and find one of us on staff, and we'd love to have a conversation about what that could look like for you. But just a couple of things before you're dismissed. The first one is your kids are still up, going strong in Countryside Kids, whatever it's called these days. And so they're hanging out there, and they're not quite ready to be picked up yet. And so this is a perfect opportunity to beat them to the cookies and just kind of hang out, get to know somebody. The second thing is I just wanted to remind you about our Chalk It Up family event this coming Wednesday from 6 to 8. That is going to be an amazing time. And the best part is it's a prime opportunity to invite kids from your neighborhood. Obviously, talk to their parents first before you just invite them. But it's going to be an awesome time. The team has been working all summer long on that event. Third thing is next week, and we are starting a whole new series called This Is Living. And we would love to see you there. So have a great week. We'll see you Wednesday and Sunday.